Hey, Eric, welcome to the show, man. Thanks so much for being on.
Thanks for having me, Alan.
So I'm excited because, your firm has the niche in its name and in its URL, which is not super common, which I love to see. And I'm really fascinated to hear more about your backstory and how your firm came to be and some of the awesome work that you're doing. So would you give listeners just sort of an overview of your practice, where you're located, when you got started, your niche market, and then we'll dig in from there?
Sure. So I started my original firm, Hilltop Financial Advisors, back in 2015. And that had a focus more on the younger generation, more millennial generation, and then kept growing that business. But then more and more, I delved into student loan planning and I started seeing more and more cases of older borrowers with student loans. And they either took out loans for their kids or they went back to school and they have these really large balances. And the planning was quite different for these people. And I said, there's probably something here and this group really needs the help. I would say more so than like a younger borrower that has all the time in the world till retirement. Retirement's really closing in on the older generation. So I started student loans over 50. Gosh, I think I bought the domain student loans over 50 back in, I think 2019, sat on it for a while.
Mhm.
And then 2021 or 2022 launched in earnest.
All right. Student loans over 50.com. I love it. We're definitely going to dig in more on that. And so, give me sort of like the overview of where the firm's at from a size perspective, number of households, revenue, like where's the firm at now?
Sure. So I think about this in terms of combined because they're
Of
kind
course.
of all wrapped up into one. So combined total, it's about 145, 150,000 in uh, revenue expected for the year. And then managing on an ongoing basis, 30 planning clients. And
Okay.
then there's the project based work with student loans and that sort of thing.
How many active projects do you typically have at a time?
Gosh, that's a good question. Three or four.
Okay. So, how did you discover financial planning? Because you were a professional athlete, correct?
Well, aspiring professional
Aspiring
athlete.
professional. There we go.
I never got paid, but I did play in one professional, very, very low level hockey game. So
Okay.
I can say
Pro am, I think is what they call that.
yeah,
Professional amateur.
yeah. Well, I grew up with the love of hockey and then, got to have a backup plan. I was really into investing and in college even. And so I just said, okay, I want to get an internship in this arena. Experience is the best teacher rather than like all the classes that I'm taking. So just send out my resume to anyone who I think has some sort of investing adjacent field. I end up getting a internship with a financial planner and she did a lot more than just investment management. And then I just thought financial planning, financial advice, investing, but this was a lot more than investing. It was the estate planning and really actually that internship, my first summer into the business, one of her clients, his wife had passed away and he had to pick up the pieces. He had a son. So I got to see all the planning work involved with, life insurance, getting paid out and just all the planning work when now it's just a single parent and this huge change in life. And then the other instance that same summer, client passed away. This time was much more expected. And they had done the estate, like all the estate planning work together, the planner and her client. And, it was, we're going to fly you down to Texas for something to do with his heart. And he didn't make it. And so, you know, got to see the process of that. I even got to go with the advisor to the widow's house. I actually found I think it was an Exxon Mobil stock certificate that was just in certificate form. Um, $20,000 just laying in a desk.
Wow.
And so I got to see these two really meaningful client interactions
Yeah, that's
planning.
real financial planning, especially
Yeah.
for someone who you thought you were just going to be managing investments. Like that's a shock to the system when those meetings are happening.
Yeah. And so I just got jazzed about financial planning from a comprehensive nature and said, that's what I want to do. And that's what got me into this.
That's so cool. Yeah, like I said, like that's it's so hard to explain it. And now you can because, we know to talk about comprehensive financial planning, but so often I think you're right that people just think, "Oh, investments," or "I'm interested in stocks," and that's cool. Like, let's see what happens. That's a respectable career, investments and finance. And then you sort of get to our little corner of the world of comprehensive financial planning, and it's hard to leave. I mean, once you see real financial planning, it's hard to do anything else. So what was sort of your path from there then? From that, did you then get a job inside of an RIA or and your CFP? Sort of what was the order of things?
Yeah, I got a job in my RIA or in an RIA different because I graduated in a different state. And so I ended up staying in Milwaukee and found an RIA locally to work for. Great place. Got my CFP letters behind my name. Did all the studying, got to learn, more investment, how to manage all that sort of thing. I started sitting in on client meetings and I just had the feeling that I needed to start my own business. So I jumped off and hit that.
So tell me about that because that you generally don't, or at least just in general, I don't find many entrepreneurs wake up one morning like, you know what, like let's just go start a business. That sounds like a great idea. Did you always know you want to be an entrepreneur? Were you an entrepreneur as a kid? Like, did you have side businesses and stuff like that as a kid, or was this sort of something you discovered in adulthood?
So I was never an entrepreneur as a kid. I never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur, really. So what happened was the lady I worked for, Karen, up in Alaska, that's where I worked during the summer. She kind of ruined me for everyone else that I would work for in the future. Like I saw her practice comprehensive financial planning. She works, I don't know, 3, 4 days a week. So high impact, profitable business, a lot of time freedom to do what she wants, spend time with her kids. And the RIA I was working for, heavy into taxes, which is great, but not necessarily from a time aspect. And I felt a little bit more inclined towards a more planning centric model. And the RIA I was working for, a little bit more investment centric, a little bit more investment focused. So it was the time piece. And then from the servicing end of things, I said, I could either try and find a place that's doing it exactly like Karen or exactly like how I see that it should be done in my mind, or I could start my own business. And I had started planning to start my own business, and that that's the route I ended up choosing to go down.
Okay. No, that makes sense. There are different motivations for becoming an entrepreneur. Everyone's got their own, but definitely like freedom of time and freedom of building the service model and working with the clients that you want to work with. I think is an understated benefit because I don't know, it's just different when you're handed clients and you're just told like you have to work with them and you may not like them or you may not get along with them and it doesn't matter. You're going to work with them because the firm brought in a client and you're going to work with them. And I even found a lot of times advisors end up working with the clients because the boss doesn't want to work with them because they don't like them. So they just sort of push them off to somebody else. And that's a huge reason to have your own firm because you really do get a lot of benefits from that.
Absolutely. You make the choices. You get to, at the end of the day, you get to make the choices.
Which is a blessing and a curse, I will
Yeah.
say. We generally talk about the good side of that, but you do get to make all the decisions. And also, said another way, you have to make all the decisions, which is one of the blessings and curses of entrepreneurship. So, okay, so 2015, you decide to launch your own firm. Were you able to start with some clients because of sort of prior work, or were you starting from scratch?
Started from absolute scratch.
Okay. Was the firm supportive? Like, did you sort of get some referrals from your old firm and that sort of thing, or was it kind of a clean break?
So it was more of a clean break. I told my boss in, gosh, around October He let me stay around until Christmas time, but it was clear that I would be taking no clients and no referrals either.
Okay. So you get started, you're in Milwaukee. And at this point, you had been in Milwaukee for a little bit. How
Yeah.
long have you been? Or I guess, when did you first get to Milwaukee?
I graduated college in 2010. So I guess we'll just say full time living in Milwaukee around then.
Okay. So you get started. Hilltop is sort of the brand. And you said you had this focus of working with millennials. Were you exploring sort of the idea of a niche at that point? Or really was sort of like, whoever can pay me to provide financial planning, like that's who I'm going to work with?
So frankly, 2015 when I launched, this was the early days of XYPN that
Yeah.
that
I mean,
well,
we started in 2014. So yeah, that you would have been one of the first 100 members for sure.
yeah. So the drumbeat of niching down wasn't as loud and compelling as it is now. And so I was pretty staunchly against being what I felt pinned into a corner. If I were to go back, I would change that up, but I almost wore a badge of generalist
Sure.
on my shoulder as almost a source of pride. So I started out that way with a at least tilt towards younger generations. So that's pretty much how I started out.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that when XYPN first started, we kind of had the concept of niche out there, but really some of the folks who were doing it, we weren't seeing a ton of success. Like we've seen a lot more success over time, and we've learned a lot since then. And that is one of the big things that has shifted for us, is being sure we are beating the drum of niche a lot more frequently. That being said, I mean, there are, in most advisory firms are generalist firms, and you can build a successful generalist firm. It's not saying it can't be done. We just see it as a leg up in sort of the new marketplace. So what was it that led you down this path of, student loans over 50? Was there like a particular case that you can remember that sort of sparked the interest, kind of like the stories from your internship, like sort of that light bulb moment of like, oh, this is an opportunity?
Yeah. There were a couple. So one was I was doing some planning work for this client and they had about $90,000 in student loan debt, sending their kids to college. The wife works for the state. And I was telling one of my advisor friends about this. And I had taken Heather Jarvis's student loan, like 3-day course
Hmm.
in the past. So I thought I knew quite a bit about student loan
You
debt.
drank the fire hose of student loan
Uh-huh.
information.
Yes. So then I was talking to my advisor friend about this, who was, I think he was going through the CSLP coursework at the time. He said, "Oh, are you going to do the double consolidation?" And I had to do a double take here. I was like, tell me more about this. And so he walked me through that. I was like, okay, yes, this is a slam dunk case for that. And so we started going through that. It worked charmingly. We got her loan. So instead of a 10-year standard repayment plan of like $1,200 a month, after the double loan consolidation process, her loan payments are a big bagel, zero.
Wow.
As long as, I mean, even COVID forbearance aside, a $0 payment for 7 or 8 more years, however long it is now, she's got public service loan forgiveness and those loans are going to be wiped away.
Okay. So
So
I'm not certainly not an expert in student loans. What does double consolidation mean?
I would say it's more of a term for the student loan. It doesn't have an official, like you're not going to call up the Department of Education or a loan servicer and say, tell me about this double consolidation. They're going to look
Okay.
at you. It's essentially 2 rounds of consolidation when you have, so from a high level, when you have parent plus loans, they in of themselves don't qualify for an income driven repayment plan. You have to consolidate first. But if you consolidate all your parent plus loans into one loan, that consolidation loan puts you in the worst income driven plan that's out there. Uh, so in practice, that means any sort of forgiveness becomes there's a much higher hurdle to reach that. But so the way the rules are stated, a consolidation loan that pays off a parent plus loan only qualifies for the worst income driven repayment plan. That's income contingent payment, ICR. However, a consolidation loan that pays off a consolidation loan qualifies for essentially all the other income driven repayment plans. It's like magic and it
That's a
opens
really
you up.
stupid rule. Just, but okay.
It's a loophole that was left open. I highly doubt Congress meant to leave it open, but it's
Yeah,
something that has existed and they haven't closed it. And so, if I can help my clients take
yeah.
advantage of it, I will most definitely do that. So you do the double consolidation process. It's essentially three consolidations, but in two rounds. And when you're done, you get on the other end of basically on the path to loan forgiveness in a much better way.
Can you even begin to describe sort of the client's reaction to going from $1,200 a month in payments to zero and with no prospect of ever having to pay it off? Like it's going to be forgiven because of her work.
A lot of skepticism. A lot.
That's true. That is fair.
Uh, they I get a lot of cross-eyed looks like, what? And because of all the complexities with it, until they actually make it through the process and get on a better repayment plan, there is a lot of second guessing, not necessarily second guessing as in they don't trust the work that I'm doing, but like, is this process actually working? Because there's a lot of different steps in the process. Once they hear about how much they can save, though, it's like, yeah, sign me up. But then through the process, is this actually going to work?
Yeah, and it does sound like a scam. I mean, if I told you like, oh yeah, like with your loans, $1,200, if we consolidate once and it goes to this one program, if we consolidate a second time, then it goes to this other program, and you don't have any payments and you never have to pay back. Like that is the definition of a financial scam, is what it sounds like. But obviously, it is not. It is taking advantage of the way the programs are set up. So you mentioned that was one. Are there other stories that you have around how you've helped clients with their student loans?
Yeah. So there was another one recently where we we got through the other side because of all the different initiatives being pushed out by the government right now with student loans. He ended up getting 265,000 wiped it. He actually
Wow,
got the public service loan forgiveness.
two
So
hundred and $60,000 of student loans gone.
yes. Yeah,
That's incredible. And he was before he started working with you, he was not aware that that was a possibility?
correct. Yeah. Had no idea. I mean, eh, rightly so, because of pre COVID, all the rules in place were essentially, he's not going to qualify for
Mhm.
this. But with all the different initiatives like the PSLF limited waiver, that was the big one that really helped him get to the the promised land.
Yeah, that's incredible. Those are big numbers. I too have sat in on gone through some of Heather Jarvis's trainings and one of the interesting things that I've learned from that, and you're a great example of this, is that student loan and working with student loans is not even a niche. That's like it's a category because there are niches within that. So can you talk about the differences when you're working with older clients who do have large student loan balances versus maybe a younger client that has either equal balance or a much smaller balance? What are the differences in the services and the needs and such that you're providing?
So, especially for parent borrowers, ones that take out the loans for their kids, they get the Parent Plus loans. I was trying to think of a good way to think of this in terms of an analogy. And it's almost like the government thinks of them like hitchhikers. Like, fine, come along for the ride, but other than that, you are on your own. And they kind of get left behind. Eh, Parent Plus loans, they don't qualify for much of the same. They essentially only get one repayment plan available, and that's after you consolidate. I mean, unless you go through that double consolidation process. But then, so aside from that, there's that unique process planning that you have to go through with a younger borrower. It's really, you either consolidate your loans or you leave them as is. You don't really have to worry about that part as much. But then with the older borrowers, there's that time piece. Like you have to save for retirement. We need to make sure that you're prioritizing those things and trying to limit any amount of payments on your student loans if possible. So when the loan balance is high enough and that borrower thinks they have to work until they're 70 to 80 or just work until they expire to pay off their loans, that's a big planning opportunity to be able to come in and say, hey, you might not have to do this. You might be able to retire a lot sooner than you previously thought. So there's that piece. And then setting up with taxes, making sure they're filing properly, and even setting up their investments, making sure, I think it- there's do you invest pre-tax or Roth IRA? That's a big one, no matter what age you are, but you really got to dig into what are the expected tax rates for the soon to be retiree potentially.
And their AGI is really important, right? For some of the student loan repayment programs or income-based repayment programs, like
Yes.
managing income and like I said, doing things like pre-tax versus post-tax 401k contributions could, you know, a wrong election, I guess, could put them out of eligibility for a program.
Yeah. And to go a little bit deeper in that, when you're in your 50s, those are typically your highest earning years. Whereas, you're just out of college. Even if you're a doctor, you get residency. So you're in pretty low income years for a while before your income really ramps up. It's the opposite, essentially, when you're older, you're scaling down eventually, but you're in your highest earning years. So you have to really pay attention how you manage the income.
Absolutely. So you have 2 brands still. You have the Hilltop and you have the student loans over 50. Is that one RIA or do you have 2 separate RIAs?
It's one RIA. Hilltop Financial Advisors is the parent company of
Okay.
student loans over 50.
Okay. How has it been managing 2 brands? Is it kinda like running 2 businesses, or is it fairly streamlined where it's just you just gotta remember which hat you're wearing in terms of who you're talking to?
Yes to both. The marketing is different. I wouldn't be able to spend a full-time job marketing for both companies at the same time. And Hilltop has been in a place where, the website SEO and the referrals are stable. So I haven't had to focus as much on that piece. And I've been more focused on ramping up the efforts with student loans over 50 because I really want to get the word out there.
So is it fair to say that sort of the student loan side of the business is where your primary focus is from a marketing and sales perspective?
Yeah. Yeah. That's where my efforts have been lately.
So what has drove the decision to keep Hilltop? Is it because it's got all this passive lead flow and there's no sense in shutting it down, or is that sort of the plan long term is to wind that side down?
I I have no plans to wind that side down. I really enjoy the clients I work with on the Hilltop side, and it is a different type of clientele. So I guess again, I'm not pinned into doing one thing, but really it comes down to the client relationships that I've built up. I really enjoy working with them. And, at the outset, I didn't want to completely shift Hilltop Financial Advisors to just marketing for student loans over 50 because, I have an idea that it was going to work out fine, but you never really know. So I didn't want to kill off
Sure.
the main source of income.
Test before,
Yeah.
test before jumping.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. And that's, I guess, how is it managing? Because, we obviously we're huge fans of having a niche. In a way, you kind of have two. One's a little bit broader than the other. So, like, how is it going between those two, targeting the clients between two? Like, because they are so different. Like, how are you managing sort of your own time and brain space to be able to make that work?
I do think yeah, that is a challenge. I do think of the overall client load from more so from an overall perspective. And, I do a lot of student loan work in general. So there's not a ton of context switching between the two brands as far as that goes, at
Okay.
least.
It's fair. I mean, it doesn't mean you're not doing student loan analysis for Hilltop Advisor clients.
Right.
There's probably still a lot of crossover.
Yeah, there is. And then this part of it, the student loans over 50 is just more specialized. And so it feels a little easier to get my head in that brain space rather than one specialization and then a complete eh, opposite specialization.
Sure.
There are certainly differences, but the switch it doesn't tax my brain as much.
Okay. I was reviewing your website and your services, which I love the transparency of just here are my services and here's what I charge. And you have two really distinctive sort of subscription services. And I find advisors sometimes struggle to create two different levels of service because we're all sort of like comprehensive or nothing or comprehensive or one time. And you've really created two ongoing subscription models. So can you talk about those two offerings? I'm a new client who has student loans. You're sort of how would you explain the differences to me and how that's ultimately working for you and the firm?
Sure. So because of the nature of who the borrowers are. And there's a spot on studentaid.gov. If you type in federal student loan portfolio, you can see all the statistics of how many borrowers are out there, how many borrowers by age. There's something like 9 million borrowers that are older than 50. So in the
Wow.
50 and plus and 60 plus age range. And then you drill down even further, there's borrowers that are about a million now, just over, crossed over recently. There's a million that have six-figure student loan balances that are over 50. So the main knock on going into this type of niche, frankly, that I heard was if they had the money to pay off the loans, they wouldn't have the loans in the first place. Therefore, there's not going to be a lot of rich clients to work with.
Sure.
You're not going to be able
May
to
not
go
have the income to support the fee.
right,
Yep.
the income or the assets, whatever. So going into this, I said there has to be, and frankly, I saw there are cases with older borrowers that have both really high student loan balances and really high either income or asset levels or both. And there just might not be as many. So I don't need a ton of quote unquote rich clients to make a profitable business. And I do want to have the impact. So there's a very easy entry point for $895 one time. You get a student loan plan after we walk through all the planning opportunities with your student loan situation. That value more than makes up for the
Oh,
cost.
for sure.
And then on the other side, processing all the forms, making sure they get filled out right, calling the servicer, that all takes time. And you want to make sure you do this right, because if you don't, you can cost yourself a lot of money. So for $67 a month, I offer the maintenance piece of things, making sure the forms are all filled out properly, calling the servicers on the borrower's behalf if needed, coordinating with their other financial professionals in their lives, that sort of thing. And then the more high ticket item, the comprehensive, that's going to start around $4,000 a year. It's based on net worth and income. And that's going to be for the borrowers that have higher income and higher asset levels to support that type of fee.
Okay. Yeah, and I love even how you named these. So strategy is a one-time service. Strategy and support is the one-time service plus the ongoing, but focused on student loans. It's an ongoing service just related to student loan service or the student loan plan. And then comprehensive, which includes all of that, but also sort of more traditional comprehensive financial planning.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, really, you should have both. But for people that might not be able to afford it, I want to be able to have them to be able to come in and still get help.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. There's going to be a lot of clients who can afford $67 a month who can't afford $333 a month. Like those are going to be two different marketplaces. Have you seen clients move between those plans at all, either upgrading or downgrading?
Not yet. No, still in the early stages. So not a ton of crossover
Sure.
between those. Still building that up.
I'm curious with, especially with, strategy and support. And I know this is just unique to student loans. how much of the work can you do for your client? Because it sounds like there's so much, it's overwhelming. I mean, the websites are awful. It's not intuitive. Like, how much can you actually do for them just to one, take it off their plate, but two, be sure it's done correctly?
Yeah. So, it's easier usually in terms of a student loan form perspective if you can do it online. In that case, I will sit in there with you, do a screen share, and make sure it's filled out properly. I'm not going to take client login credentials. That is, you talked earlier about scams. Financial advisors themselves don't have a great name for themselves, but there's even more horror stories of student loan scams out there. And one of those ways that people get scammed is they give out their student aid login credentials. So
Mm,
I need to make sure I'm distancing myself from that. I'm not going to log in as the client. I will sit in with the client, do a screen share. But then a lot of the forms, like when you're doing the double consolidation, for instance, you have to do paper forms. And I can grab the paper forms, get the information from the client ahead of time, make sure it's essentially all filled out for them. So all they have to do is sign the dotted line and mail the form in to where it needs to get mailed to. So there's that piece. And then can't think of any service. All the servicers that I know of allow for a third party information authorization. So they
okay.
sign a form and that gives me the ability to call into the servicer and at least get information for them.
Okay. And is there software to help you manage, being able to see their student loans and what programs they're on, like almost like a digital wallet for their student loans? Do you have software or is there software out there that helps streamline the process?
Yeah, the biggest one is and I got this from Heather Jarvis, and I'm pretty sure she's part of the CSLA Institute, which runs the CSLP program. They provide it's called the NSLDS organizer file, and it's Excel based, runs a macro, hit a button, you search for their specific file. It's a nasty looking TXT file, runs the macro, organizes it all in Excel. That's really the biggest key for me. And then there are other software providers out there like CSLA Tech has their own student loan planning software. My favorite is the VIN Foundation, which is targeted for veterinarians, but they have a really, really good student loan planning tool.
Oh, cool. That's a great point that there are lots of industries that are dealing with lots of student loans. And so there could be something outside the industry. Super cool.
Yeah. So mainly it's that Excel based document, and then the VIN Foundation. Those are the two main pieces that I lean on.
Just amazing given the number and just the sheer amount of student loans outstanding that there's not better technology to help advisors manage it. But I get it also. Like in the end, when you build tech for advisors, there have to be advisors doing that work to buy it. And there's just only so many advisors working with clients that have student loans. Like it's still very much niche. It is not part of comprehensive financial planning. And I put that in air quotes because at least I don't think this has changed. Like I don't think the CFP board still mentions student loans as part of their education program.
I know when I was going through the CFP program, that was feels like ages ago. They did not talk about student loans really at all. It was
Yeah, they talk
essentially
about debt, like outside of a
paying off your
mortgage.
debt.
I just
Yeah.
remember like debt was a conversation. I realized when I got into the industry, I was like, oh, it's because all of our clients are rich. And if they are using debt, it's like strategic debt, not that's how I can afford to buy things debt. But that is a argument for another day.
Sure. Sure.
Where are you seeing success in terms of client acquisition? Because this does seem like a niche that like other advisors could leverage your skill set for either, on a consulting basis or just sending you clients. But also this is like SEO. Like this seems like, great for SEO and content. So I guess where are you seeing success for client acquisition?
There's a few pieces. One is from advisors. Either the the borrower just isn't a great fit for the advisor themselves, or the advisor has the client and wants help on a consultative basis. And that's one of the reasons why I broke out my fees the way I did so that I could help other advisors if a client was working with another advisor that wouldn't preclude me from helping that person with their student loans. So that's one piece. And student loan world is big, but it's also fairly small. So you know who's working on what
Yeah.
essentially, or you have a good bench of names to call on if you need help. And so part of that has I've gotten referrals from other advisors specifically with that niche. And then from an SEO perspective, and it doesn't cease to amaze me, I post a blog and then immediately someone reads it because they're searching for this. And, you know, they reached, I just got someone that reached out to me and I look at my website as kind of small potatoes. I'm no student loan hero or no student loan planner that's posting content every single day, but I post content and it gets found somehow,
Yeah.
goes out into the ether, gets found. And then someone calls me or emails me, reaches out, says, "Hey, help me." And then the one other really successful piece is I was quoted. There's this one specific article I was quoted in. I had 8 or 9 people call me specifically from
Oh, wow.
that article itself, and a couple became clients.
How did you get into that publication? Was that you working with a reporter? Was that through one of the media requests platforms that are out there for advisors?
This was, you know, I was hitting up the Hero,
Hmm.
help a
Help
reporter
a
out.
reporter out.
Frankly, this one came from another advisor. The reporter reached out to the other advisor. The other advisor didn't have time to speak on it. And so she referred me, said, "Hey, this is exactly in this guy's wheelhouse. Talk to him." She talked to me. Next thing you know,
Very
I'm
cool.
quoted in.
I
And
mean, it really is again the power of a niche, right? And for even another advisor to know when to send you a media request, because had it been like, I don't know, how to do social security analysis, maybe that's not what pops up. Your name doesn't come to
right.
mind, but it's like, hey, this particular, and not even just student loans, but a niche inside of student loans. But awesome to hear that that's also been driving traffic your way.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you've been doing this now for 8 years. You kind of made a bit of a pivot, couple, it sounds like in the middle of COVID into the student loans over 50. Like, what are your goals for the firm? Do you want to grow? Do you want to hire? Do you want to stay solo? Sort of what do you have in the plan, I guess, for the business?
Yeah. So I want my goals are keep Hilltop growing at the steady pace that it's been growing at, increase profitability, being that if I increase profitability, then I can increase the amount of time that I take off.
Hmm.
I want to build, I am more in the camp of build a lifestyle practice where I can take off work, you know, again, going back to my first experience with this, seeing how you can build a very successful business and work 3 or 4 days a week if you want. I don't know if I could scale down to 3 days a week, but four sure seems nice. That's where I want to take things. Increase profitability, keep things growing at a steady pace, maybe hire an assistant down the road. I don't feel the need to yet at
Mhm.
this time, and make sure that student loans over 50 is growing from a let's get the word out there. There's a lot of need, and I see this as a really great area to build a successful practice in.
Absolutely. Do you have any projects or programs, new initiatives, anything that you're working on that listeners might be interested in hearing more about?
I think I have the ebook posted that I created, but I am going back and trying to rework that and make sure that that's a little more buttoned up, more updated. And because there is so much content, make sure people can find the content when they're there. And then make sure hop on the newsletter so that you're getting regular updates on what's going on in student loan land.
Okay. Yeah. So the ebook, is that something you've recently published?
I published that back in 2020 or 2021. And that had a lot of pre-COVID information on there. So quite a lot has changed. A lot has stayed the same. Just about all of it is still relevant, but there are some pieces I want to rework a little bit.
I'm curious, have you ever considered turning it into a physical book? Have you explored that at all?
I've thought about it briefly. I just haven't gone down that road yet.
Sure. Yeah, just curious. It's something that when we did the monthly retainer book, and we're working on an update to that book now because it was 2015 when we wrote that book. I was shocked at how easy it is to publish a physical book. Because those little monthly retainer books cost like I think it's $2.19 to print a copy, thanks to Amazon.
Yeah.
And so they have sort of you upload your PDF and then you get and there are people who can help you with it, but it's like the best business card because the t-shirts cost us 10 or 12 bucks. So the book's a whole lot cheaper than bringing t-shirts to every conference. We're still going to bring the t-shirts. Don't worry, everybody. But yeah, that's something that I have seen some advisors obviously choose to go the self-publishing route, but it's a lot easier, I think, than people realize just to get that book out there. So that's why I was curious if you had explored that, if there's a reason to keep it ebook. Because it is also this like constantly changing landscape as well. I mean, the moment you publish, something in that book is outdated. So keeping on top of it's probably tough.
Yeah. There, especially now, it's just constant turbulence with what's being updated and everything that's getting pushed through. But I do, I've heard that before, like having a book, it's like it's essentially a very fancy business card and it stays on like very tangible. It's going to stay on someone's shelf. Like
Mhm.
it's not going to necessarily get tossed in the trash as easily as that little business card that you
Sure.
got.
Or yeah, a little flyer or something. No, that's awesome. All right. Well, hey, it's hard to believe we're already coming up to the end of our time. So I will ask you the final question. And that is, if there's one piece of advice you wish you could go back and give your younger self, the one thing you've learned that you wish you had known back then, what would that piece of advice be?
I would say, Eric, yes, you have things figured out, but pretend that you don't,
Mm,
because I certainly didn't. Pretend you don't have things figured out. What types of questions are you? That would change all the types of questions and conversations that you end up having. I would have asked more questions, like ask more questions. Don't think that you know everything or the way that there's only one way to do good financial planning. Cause I've learned there's a lot of different ways to do really good financial planning.
Have there been any decisions you've made along the way or misses that you've had that you think of when you give yourself that advice of like, oh, if I had just asked more questions, I could have avoided this scenario?
Yeah, I think back to how I had in my mind in generating clients at the outset. And if I would have just listened to the advice that XY was giving at the time, the informational interview type style, really figure out who your niche is going to be or who your target client is going to be, ask them more questions. That would be how I would have reworked things if I were to go back.
No, that's totally fair. Awesome, Eric. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and share your story and what you're up to. It's super cool to see. I always love a great niche that's like highly referable and huge business opportunities. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your secret sauce with listeners. Thanks for taking the time.
I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.